What if I told you that the Indiana Fever might drastically alter their future with only one move? The ideal player genuinely wants to join them this time. Because Indiana is currently at a crossroads while the rest of the league is improving, particularly in light of moves like Angel rejoining the Atlanta Dream. They run the risk of slipping behind if you sit idle once again. All of a sudden, everything changes when you take the correct action. This is when things start to get interesting. Azurá Stevens is reportedly very interested in collaborating with Clark. Although there is currently no official confirmation, people are immediately making the connection since, upon closer inspection, this isn't just a good fit. It could be the ideal one. A 66-inch stretch forward who doesn't need the ball in her hands to play, shoot, defend, or grab rebounds. Indiana has been lacking precisely that. Someone who can balance an offense that had trouble with spacing, release pressure on Aaliyah Boston, and open up the floor for Clark. The issue is that we've already seen this tale. The Fever missed opportunities during the previous offseason, questionable fitting, and missed moves. There's little place for uncertainty now that the league is growing stronger. This is why it's more important than ever because if Indiana does this correctly, they're creating something genuine rather than just adding a player. However, if they fail once more, they may see another chance pass them by as everyone else continues to advance. The Indiana Fever is officially under strain. Furthermore, there is no justification for waiting this time. Because teams aren't hesitating anymore when you look around the league these days. They're putting themselves in a position to win right away, stacking talent and making bold moves. And the most transparent. Angel Reese traveling to the Atlanta Dream, for instance. It was more than a trade. It was a declaration. Atlanta has become more resilient, more physical, and more comprehensive. Additionally, they are now assembling a roster capable of competing at a high level. Not in the future, not in 2 years, but today. Indiana cannot afford to repeat the last offseason for just this reason. Because let's face it, things didn't go as planned last year. In order to appropriately develop around Clark and Aaliyah Boston's music, there were possibilities to bring in the appropriate pieces. Rather, the roster felt lacking. There was improper spacing. It wasn't a clean fit. And even exceptional talent can only go you so far when that occurs. Let's fast forward to now. The leg is getting better. The difference between teams that act and those that hesitate is growing, and the competition is becoming more intense. This off-season feels different, since it's not simply about making little improvements or adding depth. While you're still trying to sort things out, it's important to keep up and make sure you're not being passed by clubs like Atlanta. And this is the truth. 5 moves are not necessary for Indiana. 1 person, 1 choice, and 1 component that genuinely complements what they're attempting to construct are all necessary. However, if they make a mistake once more, all of this momentum, the enthusiasm surrounding Clark and the foundation with Boston, begins to stall before it can reach its full potential. And for that reason, the pressure isn't simply high at the moment. It's at its highest level in years. Then the chance presented itself. A player who truly makes sense from top to bottom for what the Indiana Fever are attempting to develop as your Stevens, not a rumor that appears out of nowhere or a name that is bandied around. And here's why this is currently receiving so much attention. There has been increasing talk that Stevens is genuinely interested in playing with Clark, particularly from fans and social media responses. Although nothing has been formally verified, the responses, exchanges, and timing of it all are enough to spark conversation because this isn't just another free agent. This player is nearly ideal for Indiana's needs. A forward with size, ability, and versatility, this veteran is about to reach her prime. Above all, someone who can have an influence without controlling the ball. That is more important than most people realize, particularly on a team that relies heavily on a playmaker like Clark. And that's what sets this pitch apart since it's typically a stretch when fans toss out perfect fit. It's coerced. More than reality, it is founded on hype. That isn't this. This is one of those infrequent instances where the opportunity and basketball logic truly coincide. However, this is where things start to get interesting. There are other teams observing besides Indiana. There may be other teams prepared to pursue Stevens, according to reports. Teams with clear responsibilities, cap room, and the potential to be just as, if not more, aggressive than Indiana in closing deals. Now, it's not only about interest, it's also about timing, execution, and, above all, whether the Fever is prepared to take action at the appropriate time. Because such possibilities are fleeting. Additionally, someone else will take over if Indiana hesitates, even a moment. This is the point at which everything starts to make sense since the fit feels almost too perfect when you break it down. In addition to being a talented player, Azurá Stevens is the precise kind of player the Indiana Fever have been lacking. Let's start with the size. She immediately adds length, rim protection, and rebounding at age 66. Just that is defensively beneficial. However, it's not simply what she does on the inside that sets her apart. It's her outdoor activities. The floor can be stretched by her. We are discussing a forward who is capable of making high-level three-pointers, which compels opponents to move aside rather than clog the paint. And everything is different if you know how Clark works. Since Clark does well in space, she grows more dangerous the more space she has to create, pass, and attack. And spacing was one of Indiana's main problems during the previous season. It seemed crammed with too many belongings. There are too many defenders occupying the lane. Azurá immediately corrects that. However, it doesn't end there. Consider how she complements Aaliyah Boston. Boston's best work is done indoors. Inner defense, post-scoring, and physical presence. Imagine combining it with a forward who, rather than bringing more bodies into the basket, draws defenders away from it. That's equilibrium. That's the structure. Instead of overlapping, that front court actually enhances one another. This is the most underappreciated aspect. The ball is not necessary for Stevens. She doesn't have to be the first or second choice. She doesn't need to control possessions to have an impact on the game. On a team where Clark will dominate the offense and have the ball frequently, that is crucial. She thereby blends in perfectly with the system rather than upsetting it. You begin to understand why this isn't simply hype when you combine shooting size, defense, adaptability, and role acceptance. Indiana cannot afford to make a mistake with this decision because it makes sense on all fronts. But for a moment, let's be honest. It wasn't talent or effort that was the main problem with the Indiana Fever last season. People don't always discuss it because, on paper, Indiana had parts, but it was fear. Clark was in charge of the offense. Aaliyah Boston was anchoring the paint for you. That's a solid base. Most teams would want to build around it. However, there was always something strange about watching the sports. The spacing wasn't neat. It felt packed on the floor. Too frequently, defenders were not forced to make difficult decisions. They might simply wait while sitting in the lane. That is problematic because spacing is crucial when your offense revolves around a playmaker like Clark. She requires space to function. Passing angles, driving lanes, and choices that compel defenses to adapt and stretch. Indiana, on the other hand, occasionally had the opposite. There were too many lineups with players in similar positions. Too many items with a lot of paint. And when that occurs, even the best players begin to appear constrained. Not because they are, but rather because the surrounding system isn't supporting them. And that's where the criticism enters the picture. It's not about criticizing certain players. It's about realizing that the fit simply didn't work. The offense seemed predictable in some lineups. Defenses were able to lock in more easily with some combinations. And it won't work in a league where players are becoming quicker, more adept, and more focused on spacing. The goal is clearly apparent as we approach this offseason. Adjust the distance. Adjust the equilibrium. Adjust the fit. Because everything else begins to open up if Indiana does that bit correctly. Clark becomes much more perilous. Boston becomes even more productive. The offense as a whole moves more smoothly. However, if they disregard it, the same problems will recur. And they can't afford that right now. However, this is where things become more complicated because Indiana's desire for Azurá Stevens isn't the only factor. It has to do with why she might be available in the first place. Take a look at the Los Angeles Sparks direction. It's obvious that they're focusing on a younger core. The focal point is Cameron Brink, a musician in whom they have made significant investments. Other parts are taking on more significant responsibilities. A team's perception of veterans on the roster always changes when they make that kind of commitment. To be clear, there isn't a formal announcement that Stevens is leaving. However, there are concerns about the way the roster is constructed. Because a dynamic forward like Stevens may occasionally become expendable in a system that prioritizes long-term development and younger players. She doesn't match the team's particular timeframe, not because she isn't valuable. Free agency becomes intriguing at that point, because other clubs will act quickly if there is even a small opening or a possibility that she won't be a long-term priority, and they will. There have already been rumors that several teams might be interested. Some are seeking experience, while others require the precise skill set she possesses. She won't be waiting around in a market like this, where versatile forwards are highly sought after. She will have genuine options. And for the Indiana Fever, that's why this moment is so crucial. Because finding the right player isn't the only thing involved. That is what they have done. Beating everyone else to the move is the goal. Because another team will step in and give her exactly what she wants if Indiana hesitates, lowballs, or overthinks it. And the opportunity is lost after that. Therefore, this goes beyond whether Stevens is a good fit. The question is whether Indiana can move quickly enough to make it happen. And this may be Indiana's greatest advantage. Because the Indiana Fever aren't simply a terrific fit for Azurá Stevens when you compare circumstances across the league. They may be the finest. Let's start with the obvious opportunity. Stevens will take on a definite role on a squad that genuinely needs her if she signs with Indiana. It's a clearly defined job where her skill set matters right away, not a crowded rotation or a situation where she's competing for touches. And not every team is able to provide that. However, there is something even more significant. Visibility. It's more than simply basketball to play with Clark right now. It has to do with exposure. Every game is observed. All of the highlights distributed. Every performance is enhanced. The Fever are now more than a team. They are among the league's most popular musical attractions. That is significant.